The chain snapped like a green branch, and every man in the ferry yard went dead silent. Snaga Ironblood stood in the center of the mud-packed yard beside the Greyvale River, her wrists raised in front of her face, studying the broken shackle the way a jeweler studies a cracked gem with calm disappointment rather than panic. The iron had been good iron, the lock had been a solid lock, and she had still pulled it apart with nothing more than a long breath and a slow tightening of her forearms. The two remaining lengths of chain dangled from the iron cuffs, still locked to her wrists, swinging like censers at a church procession. Sheriff Denholm Crass stood 10 feet back with his crossbow leveled, and his face had gone the color of old cheese. "You stay right there," he said. Snaga looked at him with amber eyes that held all the warmth of a banked fire and absolutely none of the fear he was hoping for. She was tall, close to 6 feet, her frame built with a warrior's deliberate power, broad shoulders tapering to a strong waist, thighs that looked like they could stop a cart horse mid-stride. She wore fitted warrior's leathers the color of iron-stained river clay, a sleeveless bodice laced tight up the front with dark cord, shaped to her chest and ribs with the snug precision of armorer's work, paired with close-fitted leather breeches tucked into knee-high boots with worn copper buckles. Her tusks curved upward from her lower lip, polished smooth at the tips, and her dark green skin was marked at the jaw and collarbones with the faint, raised cicatrix lines of her old warband, tattoos laid in with ash and salt the traditional way. Her black hair was loose. They had taken her war braids when they stripped her weapons, and it fell past her shoulders in thick, loose waves. She was the most striking thing Elijah Maddox had seen in years, and he was deeply unhappy about it. He stood at the back of the crowd that had gathered at the sound of breaking iron, a crate of pressed apple rounds balanced on his shoulder. He had come down to the ferry landing to ship his first autumn harvest across the river to the Millhaven market, which was the only thing that stood between his orchard and another winter of close arithmetic. He had not come to watch a bounty scene turn sideways. But here he was. "Ironblood," Crass said, and his voice cracked on the second syllable. "The merchant consortium has a lawful claim on your contract. You are a bonded worker in breach. You will come quietly or what?" Snaga said. Her voice was low, even, and dry as a hearthstone. "You will shoot me with that bolt." She tilted her head at the crossbow. "You would need a second shot, Sheriff, and by the time you cranked it I would have taken the weapon away and used it to scratch my back." There was an involuntary, muffled laugh from somewhere in the crowd. Someone elbowed it quiet immediately. Crast's jaw tightened. "I have 4 deputies and a warrant from the consortium with the governor's seal. The governor sold that seal for drinking money, and you know it." She held up her broken chain again, studying it. "Here is what I know. I was bonded to the consortium 3 years ago under a labor contract I signed under duress in a city I had never been to, far from my clan lands, because the alternative was an execution I did not deserve. I worked the river docks for 3 years. The debt was paid 18 months ago by any honest accounting. They added fees to the ledger that were not in the contract. I did not sign the addition. It is not binding. I walked away. That is not breach. That is arithmetic." She lowered her wrists. The chain clinked softly. "And I am tired," she added, with a finality that sounded like a door closing on a cold room, "of living in a cage someone built wrong." Crass looked at his deputies. His deputies looked at each other. The crowd did what crowds always do when the air thickens. It pulled back and tried to look like it was somewhere else. Elijah Maddox put his crate down. He did not know why. Years later he would be asked, and he would give different answers at different times. The honest answer was that something in the way she said it, tired of living in a cage someone built wrong, landed in a place in his chest that had been empty and echoing for a long time, and he acted before the thinking part of him could run the risk calculation. He walked through the crowd. "Sheriff," he said. Every head turned. Crass looked at him with the expression of a man who has just been offered an unexpected complication. "Maddox, this is not your business." "I know it isn't. Elijah stopped beside Snaga, which put him close enough that he could feel the faint warmth radiating off her. She ran warm, like most orcs, a furnace body built for cold hills and open sky. He was a head shorter than her and about half her width through the shoulders, with the lean, ropey build of a man who spent his days hauling bushel baskets and running irrigation channels. Not a soldier's body anymore, though it had been once. He had a week's worth of jaw growth, sun-worn skin, and a plain work coat with the left sleeve mended twice. He looked, by any accounting, like a small fruit farmer out of his depth. "You said the governor's seal is on the warrant." "It is." "Which governor? We've had two this year." Crast blinked. Governor Aldress resigned in late summer, and his office issued a formal recall of outstanding warrants pending consortium audit. There was a notice posted at the mill. Elijah looked at the warrant, which Crast was still holding in his left hand. If that warrant was issued before the recall and was not re-authenticated under the interim governor, it is legally void in this district. The silence stretched. Elijah had spent 4 years as a sellsword, 3 campaigns and 1 miserable siege. And in that time he had learned that the most dangerous weapon in any standoff was not the blade. It was the comfortable lie the other man most wanted to believe. Crast wanted to believe there was a legal path forward that did not end with him explaining to 4 deputies, and a yard full of witnesses, why they were all about to fight an orc who had just torn a chain apart with her bare hands. "I would need to verify that," Crast said slowly. "You would. Millhaven Courthouse East Records Room should take about 4 days. 4 days was long enough for any bounty situation to cool, lose momentum, and become someone else's problem. Every man in that yard understood it. Crast looked at the orc woman. He looked at Elijah. He looked at his deputies with the specific expression of a man calculating whether this hill was worth the dying. It was not. "You stay in this district," he said to Snaga, with the last remnant of official authority a retreating man can summon. "I will verify the warrant. If it is valid, it will not be," she said pleasantly. He left. His deputies left after him. The crowd dispersed with the relieved speed of people who had things to do and preferred not to have witnessed anything in particular. Snaga Ironblood looked down at Elijah Maddox. He looked back at her. "That was not completely honest," she said. "Not completely," he agreed. "There was a recall notice. The part about re-authentication was more of a guess about general legal principle. But it was a plausible guess. Apparently." She studied him for a moment with those amber eyes, and he had the distinct and unsettling sensation of being inventoried not in a cold way, but in the way that a person who has learned to read the world very carefully reads a thing they haven't seen before and are not yet sure what to do with. "You are Maddox," she said. "The Apple Man. I have an orchard up the valley, yes. I have seen your cart at the Millhaven ferry 3 times in the past 6 weeks. You were working the ferry docks," he said. "I was." A beat passed. The river moved behind them, brown-green and wide, carrying the smell of turned earth and autumn rain. "Do you have somewhere to go?" he asked. She looked at him steadily. "Why would you ask me that?" "Because you just made an enemy of the local consortium agent and you are standing in the middle of his district with broken chains on your wrists and no obvious allies. I'm not asking out of charity. I am asking because it seems like a practical question." "You already made yourself a problem for the sheriff," she said. "Why add to it?" "I am not adding to it by asking you a question." She was quiet for 3 seconds. He counted. "No," she said then. "I do not have somewhere to go. My clan lands are 3 weeks' ride northeast. I have no horse, no road coin, and these cuffs." She lifted her wrists again. The remaining broken chain glinted. "The consortium will send a proper recovery man, not just a sheriff with a recalled warrant. They like their assets." "I have bolt cutters at the orchard," he said, "and a spare room." "You are offering sanctuary to a runaway bond worker." "I am offering bolt cutters and a bed," he said. "You can leave in the morning if you want." Snaga Ironblood looked at him for a long time with an expression he could not read at all. Then something shifted in it just slightly, like a key turning in a very old lock. "You are either very brave," she said, or very stupid. I have been told those look the same from the outside, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it was the architecture of one. "Show me your bolt cutters, orchard man," she said. The Maddox orchard sat on a south-facing slope 2 miles up the valley from the ferry landing, 43 trees of old stone palm stock that had been planted by the previous owner and largely left to fend for themselves. The valley floor below it was a working landscape. The river road ran through a string of mills, small holdings, and the Crossings Tavern where the ferryman Dov Ash held court in the evenings and knew everything about everyone within 12 miles. The slope above the orchard was limestone and cedar, home to deer and occasional worse things. It was a good piece of land. Elijah had paid for it with 4 years of sword wages and approximately one bad decision at a time. The farmhouse was stone and timber, 2 rooms downstairs and one up under the sloped roof, with a good hearth and a kitchen lean-to at the back. The spare room was on the ground floor, used for storage, but there was a cot in it that he occasionally slept on himself during harvest season when he was too tired to climb stairs. He cut the cuffs off her at the workbench in the barn, the bolt cutters biting through the weakened iron in 2 clean snaps. She watched him work with her arms still, not helping, not hindering, and when both cuffs fell away she looked at her bare wrists for a long moment and said nothing. There were marks there, not deep but permanent, the kind of marks that come from 3 years of iron sitting too close to skin. He did not comment on them. He put the bolt cutters away and showed her the spare room and said supper would be ready in an hour, and he left her to it. He was not, in the ordinary course of things, a man who made impulsive decisions. He had been a sellsword for 4 years, and the first thing a sellsword learns, the one that keeps you alive while the impulsive ones die dramatically on day 7, is to think 2 moves ahead. He had hung up his sword 18 months ago and taken the orchard, and since then the 2 moves ahead thinking had been entirely dedicated to apples, irrigation, and the mill rates at Millhaven, which were highway robbery, and he deeply resented. He made lamb stew from what was left of last week's market trip and tried to work out why he had walked through a crowd toward a breaking chain without being asked. He kept coming back to the way she had said it. A cage someone built wrong. Snaga came to the kitchen when she smelled the stew. She had washed. He noticed the travel dust was gone from her face, and her loose dark hair was damp at the ends. She moved through his small kitchen with a deliberate carefulness, not touching things she didn't need to touch, as though she had learned somewhere to occupy the smallest possible space and was choosing to practice it even now. She sat at his table and ate without ceremony, and he ate across from her, and after a while she said, "You were a soldier." "Sellsword, there is a difference. A soldier has a country," he said. "I had a contract," she considered that, "and you stopped. I bought a farm. Why?" He thought about it. He had given this question flippant answers before at the Crossings Tavern when Dov Ash asked with a full cup in hand, and the question was really about something else. He had never given it the honest answer out loud. "I was good at the work," he said carefully, "and I got tired of being good at something that left me emptier every year." She put down her spoon and looked at him with an expression that was the most open thing she had shown him so far, not soft, exactly, but present in a new way. "I know that feeling," she said. She helped him wash the bowls. He did not ask her to. She simply stood next to him at the basin and took the second bowl when he set it down, and dried it with a cloth. And they did it in the same companionable silence that settled on 2 people who have somehow already skipped over the part where they are strangers. He found out later, much later, that she had once been a war band lieutenant under a clan chief who treated his warriors as tools rather than people. She had fought for 7 years with a precision and ferocity that had made her name known across the border hill country, and then one night after a battle she had sat on a hillside in the rain and looked at her own hands and thought, "I am becoming something that I will not be able to come back from." She had left the war band. The clan chief had not taken it well. There had been a legal fiction dressed up as a defection charge, and the consortium had bought the debt for the fee it represented, and she had spent 3 years on the docks learning that a different kind of cage was still a cage. He did not know any of that yet. That first night, all he knew was that she went to the spare room at candle-extinguishing time, and the house, which had been quiet in the specific way of a house with only one person in it, sounded different, inhabited differently. The small sounds of another person's breathing and weight moving through the floor, a rustling that meant someone alive and real was occupying a space nearby. He slept better than he had in months. In the morning she was up before him. He found her in the orchard at first light, walking the rows with her arms folded, studying the trees with an expression of serious assessment. The late autumn fruit was mostly off. He had been in the middle of final harvest when the ferry yard incident interrupted, but there were still a dozen trees with stubborn stragglers clinging to the upper branches, and she was looking at them with a thoughtful tilt to her head. "You are losing about 30 pounds of fruit to the top branches," she said when he came up beside her. The morning air was cold and sharp, and she was not shivering. "You need a better reach ladder or someone tall." "I have been meaning to build a better ladder." "I am tall," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Are you offering to help with my harvest?" he said. "I am offering to work for my room and board," she said, with a careful dignity that was not pride for its own sake but something more considered, the dignity of a person who does not accept charity and is being very precise about what is and is not charity. "I am not a guest in my own understanding. If I occupy your house, I work for it." "Fair," he said. "The upper branches and the irrigation channel on the east side, which is blocked. After that we'll see." She was not exaggerating about the upper branches. She was 6 feet of muscle and reach, and she cleared the upper thirds of a dozen trees before mid-morning, with a focused efficiency that would have taken him 3 times as long, pulling clusters of firm late keepers, and handing them down to his basket with the same methodical care she had applied to the bolt-cut iron, precise, unhurried, effective. He watched her when he could do so without it being obvious. He told himself it was because the situation was still precarious. The consortium's recovery man would come eventually, and he needed to think, but that was not entirely why. The truth was she was compelling in the specific way that a thing is compelling when it is exactly, honestly itself with no performance or apology, and he was finding it harder to look away than he expected. She caught him looking twice before noon. The second time she looked back at him without embarrassment and said, "Is there something on my face?" "No," he said. "Then what?" "Nothing," he said. "You are efficient." A pause. The faintest quality of amusement entered her eyes. "Is that what you were looking at?" "My efficiency. Your technique," he said very seriously. "With the clusters, most people pull the stem wrong and bruise the fruit." "Ah," she said. She was very nearly smiling again. "The fruit." He turned back to his basket with the specific focused attention of a man who is not going to acknowledge that his neck is warm. The recovered apples went into the press that afternoon. He showed her the process, the wash tank, the trough, the pressing wheel, and she learned it in about 4 minutes and then operated the press with about twice the speed he managed alone. And by evening they had 3 barrels of pressed juice laid in the cold cellar, and the remaining whole fruit packed in straw for the Millhaven shipment. They ate supper side by side on the low stone wall at the orchard's edge, looking at the river below in the last of the daylight. The valley was golden and amber with the season, the mills turning slow in the lowered water, wood smoke rising from the farmstead chimneys, the ferry bell sounding twice across the water. "You lived in this valley before," she said. It was not quite a question. "I bought the orchard 18 months ago, but I passed through 10 years ago on my way to the Hartwall campaign. Spent 3 nights at the Crossings Tavern waiting for a river crossing." She was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, "The Hartwall campaign was north of the border hills." "Yes." "I was at Hartwall," she said, "on the other side." The weight of that settled between them without drama. In this part of the world, humans and orcs had been at war, then at tense peace, then at war again in a cycle that had been running for 3 generations. It was not a simple history, and it did not produce simple feelings. "Did you fight at the crossing at Greyvale?" she asked. "No, we went north around it. You?" "I was with a war band that held the eastern ridge for 11 days. We never came down to the river." "Then we didn't try to kill each other," he said. "Not personally," she said. There was a long silence, and then she said, with that dry, flat quality she gave to things that were simultaneously serious and not, "I suppose that is a start." He laughed. It surprised him, not a polite laugh, but a real one from the chest, the kind he hadn't produced in a while. She looked at him with an expression of pleased surprise, as though she had thrown a stone and was startled by where it landed. "You have a good laugh," she said, and sounded as though she had not meant to say it out loud. "You have a good deadpan," he said. "I have no idea what you mean," she said, in a tone of absolute deadpan. He laughed again, and she watched him do it with that same carefully guarded expression, the one that was keeping something at a safer distance than it wanted to be. The recovery man arrived on the 4th day. His name was Breck Voss, and he was not a sheriff. He came with 2 mounted assistants and a consortium writ of re-authentication signed under the interim governor's seal, which closed the legal window Elijah had bought at the ferry yard. He arrived at the orchard in the mid-morning, riding down the valley road with the relaxed authority of a man accustomed to having the paperwork. Elijah saw them coming from the orchard and walked down to the gate, which was not actually a wall, just a stone post on either side of the lane, but the principle of the thing was the same. He stood in the lane with his arms at his sides and waited. Snaga came out of the barn behind him and stood at his shoulder, and when she saw the writ in Voss's hand, she said very quietly, "That is a proper seal." "I see it," he said. Voss reined in his horse 6 feet from the gate. He was a broad, cold-eyed man in consortium gray, with a catch-pole strapped to his saddlebag that was the kind of tool used for things that Elijah had a very strong and immediate dislike of. "Maddox, you are harboring a bonded asset in breach of a valid contract. I have a duly authenticated writ of retrieval. Step aside." "The contract was disputed," Elijah said. "She has a legal claim to challenge the fee additions. That challenge has to be made through a consortium arbiter. Then I will accompany her to the arbiter." "That is not how it works. She is returned to custody pending arbitration." "What custody? Where?" "Consortium holding, Millhaven." He knew what consortium holding meant. He had ridden past the Millhaven facility once and seen the state of it from the road. "No," he said. Voss studied him with the flat professional patience of a man who has done this many times. "Maddox, you are a fruit farmer. You are standing between a legal instrument and its execution. Do you understand the consequences?" "I understand them. I am still here." "I could have you arrested." "You could try." He said it without heat, without bravado, with the same matter-of-fact calm he used when he told the Millhaven mill agents that their rates were extortion. "But arresting me in front of my farm, in front of the ferryman's crossing where Dov Ash knows every piece of local business, in a valley where 3 other farmers owe me favors and 2 of them have loud opinions about consortium practices, that is a morning of very public complications for a retrieval that you thought would take an hour." Voss's jaw moved slightly. "I will pay the disputed fee," Elijah said. Silence. Snaga behind him said, very low and very controlled, "Elijah, the amount in dispute is what 90 coin," he said. He was looking at Voss. 94 silver accrued administrative fees." "I have 87 in the orchard house," he said. "I can have 7 more from Dov Ash by this afternoon. Pay the 94, sign the debt satisfied, give her the release documentation. Then we have nothing further to discuss." It was the entire liquid reserve he was holding back for the winter mill rate. He did the arithmetic in his head in the 3 seconds of silence that followed, and it was not good arithmetic. He was going to be very close to the bone until spring. He did not move. Voss looked at him for a long moment, then looked at Snaga, then made the calculation that a man makes when the balance of complexity shifts past the point of profitability. "Get the coin," he said. The exchange took 30 minutes. Voss took the coin, gave her the papers, looked at both of them with the flat expression of a man filing something in the back of his mind for a later accounting, and rode away with his assistants. Elijah watched them go. Snaga was very quiet beside him. "That was your winter reserve," she said. "It was. You spent your winter reserve on my freedom. I paid a contested debt on your behalf which you can repay if and when, Elijah." Her voice was not loud, but it stopped him the way a raised hand stops a room. He turned and looked at her. Her amber eyes were doing something complicated, and the guarded quality she wore so naturally had cracked open at the center, just slightly, showing something underneath that was raw and real and almost painful in its openness. "No one has done something like that for me." He held her gaze. "You would have found another way." "Yes," she said, "but that would have cost more than money." The wind moved through the orchard behind them, shaking the last leaves loose, and they fell through the morning air in slow, turning gold. "You do not have to stay," he said, because it was true and because she needed to hear that it was true. "The papers are clean. You are free. Your clan lands are 3 weeks northeast. I can give you road coin from the press money." She looked at him for a long time. The complicated thing in her eyes settled into something quieter and more resolved. "I know," she said. "I am choosing to stay." He blinked. "Why?" "Because you asked me a practical question in a ferry yard when no one else even looked at me," she said. "Because you let me work beside you instead of behind you. Because you just spent your winter on me and called it a contested debt." She paused. "And because I want to." He stood there in the lane of his small orchard farm with the autumn wind going through the trees and his winter reserve gone and the most formidable woman he had ever met telling him she wanted to stay, and he had absolutely no framework for it. "All right," he said, which was not the most eloquent response available to him. Something warmed in her expression. It was not the not-quite smile from the ferry yard. It was something more settled and more deliberate. "All right," she agreed. The valley had opinions about it naturally. Not all of them were hostile. Dov Ash at the crossings was more curious than anything. He had the ferryman's constitutional interest in unusual arrangements, and he gave Elijah a careful look across the bar one evening and said, "She pulling her weight up there." "More than her weight," Elijah said. "Then good," Dov said, and poured him another cup. Others were less sanguine. Harl Pren, who farmed the flat bottomland below the orchard, and had a deep suspicion of anything that moved through the valley without his knowing about it first, came up the lane 3 days after Voss departed with his arms crossed, and his 2 grown sons flanking him like ill-tempered brackets. "Word is you've got an orc woman living up here," he said. "Word is accurate," Elijah said. "That is asking for trouble. I ask for trouble about twice a year and I am still here. Maddox." Pren's voice dropped to the tone of a man being confidential, which meant he was about to say something he knew was not his best moment. "I have got cattle on the east field. I have got an 8-year-old milk cow that I cannot replace. I'm not saying she would, Harl." Elijah kept his voice even. "She was a dock worker for 3 years and a war band lieutenant before that. She is not interested in your cow. If she were, you would have already found out." Pren went away, not entirely convinced, but went away. What Elijah did not anticipate was Snaga herself dealing with Harl Pren, which she did about a week later without mentioning it to him. Pren's east fence had come down in a night storm, and 3 of his cattle were out in the river road at first light. And Snaga, who was up before dawn as a matter of personal habit, found them and drove them back single-handedly, repaired the downed section of fence with river stone and the wire from her own kit, and left without identifying herself. Pren figured it out from the quality of the stonework. It was better than anything his own sons would have managed, and came back up the lane a few days later with a round of hard cheese and a somewhat different expression. "Tell her thank you," he said to Elijah. "Tell her yourself," Elijah said. "She is in the press barn." There was a pause. Pren went to the press barn. What was said there, Elijah did not know, but Pren left without his son's expressions looking like brackets, and Snaga came back to the house that evening and said, "Your neighbor is an anxious man. He means well. Did you terrify him?" Only a little, she said, with that dry satisfaction that he was learning to read like a language. They fell into a rhythm that felt, from the inside, like something that had been waiting to happen for a while, not forced into a shape, but settling into the shape it naturally took when the edges were given room. She knew things he didn't. She knew how to read weather in the hills the way her warband had by the temperature drop at dawn, the smell of the east wind, the way the deer moved before a storm. She set up a windbreak on the orchard's north edge, using deadfall and stacked stone that cut the frost damage on the early blossom trees by a measurable amount. She knew which plants along the river bank were useful for what, not in a healer's way, but in the pragmatic way of someone who had spent years in the field without a healer available and had learned to make do. He knew things she didn't. He knew the valley's politics, who owed whom, who the mill agents were afraid of, which of the Millhaven factors could be haggled, and which ones would only respect a fixed position. He knew how to negotiate for seed credit, and when to take the press money in kind versus coin. He knew how the seasons here worked, what the river did in spring flood, where the good stone for repair work was quarried, and how to keep the cellar temperature stable through January. They were, practically speaking, useful to each other. They were also, practically speaking, becoming more than that with a speed that neither of them was pretending not to notice, while simultaneously pretending very hard not to notice. The banter was the thing that gave it away. It started about 2 weeks in, on an evening when they were hauling the last of the packed fruit crates down to the ferry dock for the Millhaven shipment. He was struggling with a crate that had warped and was refusing to stack properly on the cart, and she was watching him with that quiet inventory look, and he said, I know, without her saying anything. I did not say a word, she said. You were about to. Was I? You were thinking extremely loudly about how you could solve this in 10 seconds. 8 seconds, she said, and stepped forward and solved it in 8 seconds, resting the warped crate flat with a half-turn that corrected the warp on the stack corner, and then looked at him with serene satisfaction. Show off, he said. I prefer efficient, she said, with the delivery of someone returning a gift in better condition than it was received. Was that not your word? I take it back, he said. You cannot take back a compliment, she said. It is already in the air. He laughed. She smiled, actually smiled this time, not the architecture of one, but the real thing, and it transformed her face into something that hit him squarely in the middle of his chest and stayed there. He thought about that smile for the rest of the evening with the focused attention a man gives to something he is trying not to give focused attention to. In the 3rd week, the dreams started. Not bad dreams. He had those too, occasionally, the common tacks of a former soldier, but something else, something warmer and more persistent, in which she was simply present, close, and the warmth she radiated physically had become the warmth of the entire world around him, and he woke from them in the dark of his upstairs room with a specific clarity about his own situation. He wanted her, not in an abstract way and not in a way he could reduce to practical admiration. In the way that a man wants a person he is starting to love, which was a thought that arrived with the certainty of a falling stone and left him staring at the ceiling with a very complicated morning ahead. The morning was also complicated because Dov Ash sent a message up with a traveling peddler. There were men asking at the crossings, not consortium men, something else, inquiries about an orc woman matching her description. A bounty posting, not legal retrieval, the kind that didn't need a warrant. Someone had put a price on her that wasn't about the debt. He showed her the note. She read it twice, then set it down on the table with the same deliberate care she gave to everything, and the expression on her face was the one he had not seen before, not the guarded inventory, not the dry amusement, not the open rawness from the lane after Voss. This was something older and harder, a particular kind of tiredness. The war band, she said. My old clan chief I left, he does not forgive leaving. How dangerous is this? She looked up at him. Dangerous enough that you should know who you are housing. I know who I am housing. You know who I am now, she said. You know the dock worker and the woman who fixes fences and teases you about apple crates. You do not know Snaga. Her name in his mouth was a new thing, and she heard it the way she heard everything precisely. Tell me, she told him. The war band, the clan chief, a man named Gore Ashbone, who had taken 7 border settlements by force and called it policy, and paid the consortium enough that the legal infrastructure looked the other way. She had been his lieutenant because she was the best, and because she believed, for years, that what they were doing was a necessary defense of their territory. And then one night after the Hill settlement at Redmoro, she had looked at what she had done and could not make it add up to necessary anymore. She had walked away. Gore Ashbone had decided that a lieutenant who walked away was a liability he preferred to resolve permanently, and the consortium debt had been a convenient mechanism. The debt is paid now, Elijah said. The debt was never really about the debt, she said. He sat with that for a moment. Then, how many people does he send? For me, 2 or 3. He is efficient. He does not waste men. Then we have a few days before whoever he sent picks up the trail. Elijah, she stopped, started again. I can go. If I go northeast toward my clan lands, they will follow me away from this valley. This is not your problem. You keep saying that, he said, because it is true. It was my problem from the moment I walked through a crowd at the ferry yard, he said. I walked through it. I knew what I was doing. I spent my winter reserve on it. I am not asking you to leave. I am asking permission to stay and fight, she said, not asking you to fight for me. If there is a fight happening in my valley, he said, I will be in it. She studied him. The guarded thing in her expression was gone entirely now. She was looking at him without any armor at all, just direct and real and searching. Why, she said, you gave me freedom and you could be done with it. Why keep choosing this? He held her gaze across the table and said, with a care that matched hers, because this is the least empty my house has felt in a long time. Because every morning I'm up before the light and you are already in the orchard, and I think, this is what I did not know I was missing. Because you are the most real person I have been around in years. He stopped, then finished. And because I think you know exactly what I mean by that. The silence between them was not an empty silence. Snaga stood up from the table and walked around it and stopped in front of him and looked down at him. He was still seated. She was standing. The difference in their heights made him have to tilt his head back, and she looked at him for a long moment with something enormous and careful moving through her expression. Then she put one large, green hand against the side of his jaw, palm flat, the warmth of her skin like a hearthstone against his cheek, and she leaned down and she kissed him. It was not a tentative kiss. It was the kiss of a woman who, having decided something, commits to it with her entire person, slow and deep and deliberate and warm in the same way she was always warm, that furnace heat that he had been noticing since the ferry yard. And he brought his own hands up and held onto her forearms and kissed her back with everything in him. She pulled back after a moment and looked at him. I am not going to tell you it is simple, she said. Her voice was lower and rougher than its usual dry register. It is not simple, he agreed. Nothing about this is simple. But I have chosen it, she said, clearly. Clearly, he said, and the warmth in his chest was so large and so sudden that he felt slightly unsteady with it. She sat down again, close now, her shoulder against his. They stayed like that in the lamplit kitchen for a while, his hand finding hers on the table, her fingers lacing through his with a deliberate precision that was her particular way of doing everything. They had about 2 days before Gore Ashbone's men arrived. They used them well. The second day, they went to Millhaven together for supplies and to leave word with a specific type of person. The valley knew how to keep its own counsel when it wanted to. Dov Ash confirmed that 2 riders had come through the crossings asking questions the night before, men with the hard look of people who were not curious by nature, and they had been pointed east on a false description provided by Dov himself, who had strong opinions about consortium-adjacent bounty work and considerably stronger opinions about a man who had just fixed Harl Pren's fence without being asked. They will come back when the east road dead ends, Elijah said. Yes, Snaga said. She was looking at the road with the particular stillness that he had learned meant she was making plans. They will. 2 men, he said. 2, she confirmed. Gore sends good men. They will be experienced, but not in this valley. She looked at him. What are you thinking? I am thinking we go home and prepare and we do not run, and when they come to the orchard they find something other than what they expect. A fruit farmer and a free orc woman, she said with a dry edge. A fruit farmer, he said, who was a sellsword for 4 years and still knows where his sword is, and a free orc woman who was a war band lieutenant. The look she gave him then was one he had not seen before, either respect mixed with something warmer than respect, the look of someone who has revised their estimate of you upward and is pleased by the revision. You are full of surprises, she said. I have been told those look the same as stupidity from the outside, he said. Brave and stupid, she said, and a smile pulled at the corner of her mouth. You said that at the ferry yard, he said. I am increasingly unable to identify which one applies, she said. They went home and prepared. The 2 riders came on the morning of the 3rd day. They came up the valley road in the gray pre-dawn, which was professional, the hour when human sentries are at their lowest alertness. What they did not account for was that Snaga Ironblood had been awake since 3 in the morning on a hilltop where she could see the road from a mile out, and Elijah had been at the barn gate since 4 with his sword on his hip, and the flat patience of someone who had done this before. When the 2 men reached the orchard gate, they found both of them waiting. The riders pulled up. They were big men, human and orc mixed, the hybrid background common in the border hills. One human, dark-bearded with a short recurve bow and a consortium transit badge pinned to his coat. One orc, gray-skinned and heavy-jawed, with a weighted catch chain across his saddle. The chain was the one that made Elijah's jaw tighten. He recognized what kind of work that chain was for. Ironblood, the bearded man said, not to Elijah. You know why we're here. I know why Gore Ashbone sent you, Snaga said. She was standing just behind Elijah's right shoulder, and her voice was the level, cold calm of someone who is not afraid and is letting that be visible. I am a free woman with signed release documentation from the consortium. You have no legal instrument. Gore doesn't need a legal instrument, the orc rider said. He needs you back. To deal with a problem that I represent, she said. Yes, I know, she paused. I am not coming back. The bearded man's eyes moved to Elijah. You, orchard man, walk away and we do not have a problem. I am standing on my own land, Elijah said. You are the ones who need to walk away. Last chance, the bearded man said, and his hand moved toward his bow. And then Snaga did something that stopped the entire scene like a thrown stone into still water. She stepped forward around Elijah and put herself directly between him and the rider with the bow. Fully between them, close enough that a bolt aimed at Elijah would have to go through her first. She spread her arms slightly at her sides, chest up, head high, and she looked at both riders with an expression so absolute and so complete that neither man reached for anything. You will not touch him, she said. The words were quiet. They were also the most serious thing in the valley at that moment. He is not your clan, the bearded man said, but his hand had stopped moving. He is mine, Snaga said, in any understanding of that word you care to use. And I am telling you directly and in front of this road and this valley, if you send a bolt past me toward this man, you will not leave this farm walking. Both of you. I am not saying this as a threat. I am saying it as a description of what will happen. I was at Hartwall, I was at Redmorow. I know exactly what I can do in 10 yards of open ground. She tilted her head slightly. Do you want to find out if I am exaggerating? The orc rider was looking at her. The look was not a cold professional look anymore. It was the look of a man who is recalibrating his entire morning. This is not over, the bearded man said. Tell Gore Ashbone, Snaga said, that I am going to send my release papers by the end of the week to the Border Council's legal registry. The debt is paid, the contract is void, and it is in a public record. If he sends anyone else, he will need to explain to the Border Council why he is pursuing a legally free citizen for private reasons, and Gore does not want that conversation. The riders stared at her. "Go," she said. They went. Elijah watched them ride down the valley road until they were out of sight around the river bend, and then he let out a long, slow breath that he had been holding since approximately when she stepped in front of him. He turned to look at her. She was still facing the road, and she was coming down from whatever operational stillness she had been holding, her shoulders dropping half an inch, her jaw unclenching, her hands relaxing from the loose-fisted readiness they had been in. She looked for a moment like a very large and very powerful woman who has just finished doing something very hard in a way that looked easy, and the cost of it was visible for about 3 seconds before she assembled herself again. "You stepped in front of me," he said. "Yes," she said, "they could have put a bolt in you. They would have needed very fast reflexes." She turned to look at him. "And they would have had to decide that their job was worth dying for. I do not think it was. You did not know that. I knew it was more likely than not." He stood in the lane and looked at her and felt something so large move through him that he didn't have an immediate language for it, only the raw physical sensation of it, like a change in air pressure before a storm. "Why?" he said. "Why step in front? You are faster than me. You could have handled both of them." "Because I would not risk a bolt in you," she said, and the simplicity and completeness of it left no room for argument. "Not for any tactical reason. Not because you are a useful ally, because I am not willing to lose you." She held his gaze. "That is why." He covered the distance between them in 3 steps and took her face in both his hands and kissed her with everything that had been building since the ferry yard and the bolt cutters and the morning in the orchard when she smiled for the first time. And she made a low sound against his mouth and put her hands at his back and pulled him close with a gentleness that was enormous and careful and infinitely tender for hands that had just scared 2 armed men off a road. They stood in the lane in the thin morning light holding on. "I need you to understand something," he said, his forehead against hers, his voice rough. "I am not going to pretend the past few weeks have not already changed everything for me. I am not good at pretending. I tried once, spent 4 years as a sellsword pretending the work was fine, and I was terrible at it." "You are terrible at pretending," she agreed. She was smiling. He could feel it against his cheek. "You looked at me 6 times before noon on the first harvest day. I was monitoring your technique with the apple clusters. You were not." Her arms tightened briefly around him. "I was watching you watch me, Elijah Maddox, and trying very hard to decide what to do about it." "And what did you decide?" "That I had spent enough years doing the harder, more sensible thing," she said, "and that the easier thing was terrifying, but I was choosing it anyway." "The easier thing," he said. "Is that what this is?" "I said it was terrifying," she reminded him. "That does not mean it is not right." They filed the legal papers at the Border Council Registry in Millhaven 4 days later. The registrar, a small, neat man named Forsyth who had seen many unusual things in 30 years of legal work, took her release documentation without comment, stamped it, entered it in the public record, and handed her the certified copy with the careful neutrality of a professional who is paid to process paperwork, not to have opinions about it. Snaga held the certified copy for a moment before folding it, and something in her face went very quiet and very private, the expression of someone who has just seen a door close on a room they survived but do not need to go back to. "Done," she said. "Done," he agreed. Walking back through the Millhaven market to the cart, she slipped her hand into his with the same deliberate precision she brought to everything. Several market stalls worth of people watched them go by. Most of the looks were the looks of people encountering an unexpected thing and reorganizing their world slightly to accommodate it. A few were less comfortable. One man, a grain factor she didn't know and Elijah did, opened his mouth with the clear intention of saying something unpleasant. Elijah looked at him. Not threatening, not dramatic, just the flat, clear look of a former sellsword who has calculated every situation in terms of its outcome before deciding whether to engage with it. The grain factor closed his mouth. Snaga glanced at him sideways. Was that the farmer version of a warning? That was the valley version of a conversation, he said. Very efficient. "You learned from me," she said. I learned from the best, he said. She squeezed his hand. The months that followed had the quality from the inside of something settling into its true shape. Winter came to the valley with its particular combination of austere beauty and arithmetic. The frozen press barrels in the cellar, the thin stores, the close accounting of a winter on a reduced reserve. Elijah was managing it, not comfortable but managing, and Snaga had added to the household in ways that did not reduce to coin, but that made the margin wider and the cold less sharp. She hunted the cedar hills above the orchard with a horn bow. She had traded Dov Ash a season of ferry deck work to acquire, nothing large, deer and pheasant, and once a ridge boar that kept them in smoked meat for 6 weeks. And she had a gift for the quiet, patient industry of winter maintenance that he had not expected from someone whose previous winters had been war-band campaigns. He discovered slowly, in the way that you discover things about a person when you share a house through a cold season, what she was like when no one was watching for threat. She read. He had 4 books and she worked through all of them, methodically, occasionally reading passages aloud with the same dry delivery she gave to everything, and then asking questions about them that were consistently better questions than he would have thought to ask. She kept a personal journal in orc script that she wrote in the evenings, the marks small and precise, and she never offered to translate it and he never asked. She had a habit of going outside at night and standing in the cold looking at the sky for 10 or 20 minutes before she came back in, which he asked about once, and she told him it was a war band practice. The navigator of the band read stars, and she had learned it, and she found it settling. He started going outside with her, and she started naming the stars. He discovered she was funny, not just dry, but genuinely funny, with a specific talent for the long-delayed observation that arrived 3 exchanges after the moment it referred to and was twice as effective for it. She made him laugh at least once a day. He could not remember the last time someone had done that with such consistency. He discovered that the warmth she radiated physically was matched, internally, by a warmth that was careful and considered and given in deliberate choices rather than freely distributed, and that made the moments when it was directed at him feel specific and irreplaceable. He discovered that she slept lightly and deeply still, the still of someone who had trained themselves out of nocturnal vulnerability, and that on the nights the old soldier's dreams came back for him, and he woke with his heart hammering. She was aware of it even from the spare room below. He would come downstairs for water, and she would be sitting at the kitchen table with a cup, not asleep, and she never said anything dramatic about it. Only poured him a cup too, and sat with him until the dark was manageable. She was, in the private accounting of his interior life, the person he had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting, the one who made the house sound right, the one who made the work mean something, the one whose presence converted the particular silence of a man alone into something full and inhabited. He told her so one January evening by the fire, in plain language without ceremony, and she sat with it for a moment and then said, in a voice that was completely unguarded, "You were the first person who asked me a practical question when no one else was looking." "At the ferry yard," he said. "Yes. Do you have somewhere to go?" "Not are you all right, not that is terrible, but a practical question. You treated me like a person with a problem to solve, not a situation to be managed." She turned her cup in her hands. "I have not been treated like that in a very long time." "You deserve to be," he said. "I know," she said, "but knowing it and experiencing it are different things." She looked at him across the fire. The amber of her eyes caught the orange of the flame, and her dark hair was loose over her shoulders, and the firelight caught the cicatrix lines at her jaw and collarbones and made them look like inlaid silver, and she was so vivid and so present and so entirely herself that it struck him again, the falling stone certainty, the thing he had been living with since the first morning in the orchard with full force. "I love you," he said. She went very still. He did not take it back. He met her gaze and waited. Snaga set down her cup. She stood up from the fireside chair and crossed to where he was sitting and lowered herself onto the hearthstone beside him, which brought her to his height, and she took his face in her hands again, her thumbs against his jaw, her palms at his cheeks, that hearthstone warmth, and she looked at him with all the armor off, completely, nothing between what was in her expression and the air. "I love you," she said. "I have been trying to identify when it started and I cannot. I think it was already in motion at the ferry yard and I did not have a name for it." He brought his hands up to her wrists. "That was 4 months ago." "Yes," she said, with the faintest edge of helpless wonder in her voice, as though she herself was slightly startled by the accounting. "Yes, it was." He kissed her, and she kissed him back, and the fire crackled and the January wind moved past the shuttered windows of the small stone and timber house on the orchard slope, and inside it was very warm. What followed was not the breathless rush of a beginning, but the deep, deliberate warmth of two people who have already chosen each other, and are now, at last, in a position to say so with their whole persons. She was careful with him, not tentative, but careful in the way that someone is careful with a thing they value, and he was present with her in a way that he had not been present with anyone in a very long time, fully there, nothing held back, and she felt it and he felt her feel it, and neither of them looked away. They stayed by that fire until the embers were low. He woke in the morning to the early light coming through the window and the smell of wood smoke and the warmth beside him that was Snaga Ironblood, awake and watching the ceiling with a private expression that softened when she noticed he was awake. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. There was a silence that was entirely full. "So," he said. "So," she agreed. "This is what you are choosing," he said. "The orchard, the valley, the small stone house, the man who talks to his apple trees. You talk to your apple trees when I think no one is listening. What do you say?" "I tell them to grow faster," he said. "It has limited effect." She laughed, a real laugh, round and warm in the quiet room, and it was possibly the best sound he had heard in his life. She rolled toward him and settled her chin on his shoulder and looked at the window where the winter light was coming in pale and clean. "Yes," she said, "this is what I am choosing. The orchard, the valley, the man who talks to his apple trees." She paused. "I have been in war bands and dock yards and bond holds. I have been in every kind of hard place this world has." She turned to look at him. "This is the first time in my adult life that I want to be where I am specifically, not enduring it, not surviving it, wanting it." "I want you to want it," he said. "I want you to have it, as long as you want it." "What if I want it for a very long time?" "That would be," he said, "the best possible outcome." She held his gaze for a moment, and then something shifted in her expression, the deliberate quality she brought to things, the consideration, the precision, taking hold of something, and she said, "There is an orc custom, an old one from before the war periods. When a woman claims a partner not as claimed but claims, she marks herself in them. A small mark here." She touched the inside of her left wrist, just below the old iron scar. "It is not binding by anyone else's law. But in our tradition it means, I chose you, specifically I chose you." He looked at her wrist, at the faded iron marks above where she was pointing. "I would be honored," he said. She was very still for a moment, studying him. Then again the armor was simply not there. "You do not need to consider it." "I have considered it," he said. "Ask me anything about the orchard, the road, the winter stores. I will think about it for hours. I have considered this since approximately the day you fixed Harl Pren's fence without being asked." He held out his left wrist beside hers. "I want the mark." She looked at his wrist. At the lean, rope-muscled forearm, the sun-dark skin, the scar from the Heartwall campaign that ran diagonal across the back. She took his wrist in her hand and held it with a steadiness and weight that was entirely intentional. She went to her kit in the spare room. It was still technically her room in name, though the name had become fairly theoretical since January, and came back with a small curved needle and a pot of dark ink made with ash and oil in the way of her warband's marker work. She sat across from him at the kitchen table in the morning light, and she marked the inside of her left wrist first, quick and certain in the orc script for her own name, and then she took his left wrist and marked the inside of it with the same script, her name, in 3 small characters, ash dark and clean. She held his wrist for a moment after. "In my tradition," she said, "this means I chose you. It means you are mine and I am yours, and I said so in front of the sky." "In front of the sky," he said. "We are near a window," she said. "It counts." He looked at the 3 dark characters on his wrist, her name on his skin. "Snaga," he said. "Elijah," she said. The morning light fell through the kitchen window and across the table, and across their joined hands, and across the marks they had made. The small permanent record of a choice that had started at a ferry yard on a gray autumn morning, when a chain broke and nobody moved, and one man walked forward anyway. They dressed and went out into the winter orchard together, side by side in the cold, clear air, and the trees stood in their bare rows on the south-facing slope, waiting for spring, and the valley spread below them in the long quiet of January, the river running dark between its ice-edged banks, the mill wheels still, the smoke rising from the farms, the ferry bell sounding once across the cold water. Harl Pren was at his east fence below, and he saw them on the orchard slope and raised one hand. Snaga raised her hand back. "He will want to know what that is on your wrist," Elijah said. "He can ask," she said. "I will give him an answer." "The whole valley will want to know," he said. "Then the whole valley will get an answer," she said. "I am not hiding this. I have hidden enough things for enough years. I am done hiding." He looked at her in the winter morning, standing in his orchard with the cold light making the cicatrix lines shine silver and her loose dark hair moving in the east wind and her amber eyes on the valley below with a proprietary calm that was the look of a woman who has arrived somewhere and is no longer leaving. "Are we doing this?" he asked. "Properly." "By which I mean in whatever version of properly you want. Your tradition, mine, neither, both. I am not particular about the form, but I want to know if we are doing this." She turned to look at him. A long moment. "Yes," she said, "we are doing this." When he said, "Now," she said, he blinked. "Now is cold." "The valley is right there," she said, with a gesture at the landscape below the road, the farms, the mills, the ferry crossing, everything that had watched this whole season unfold. "I do not want to wait for a ceremony. I want the valley to see what it is already seeing." She looked at him steadily. "Dav Ash is at his ferry. Harl Pren is at his fence. The road is the road. We walk down and we say it in front of whoever is there, and that is the ceremony. In my tradition and yours both, a declaration is a declaration." He was quiet for 3 seconds. "All right," he said. It was what he had said at the orchard gate when she first stayed, and she heard it the same way, not insufficient but complete, the full answer in 2 words. They walked down from the orchard to the valley road. It was a January morning, and the road was cold and nearly empty. But by the time they reached the ferry crossing, Dav Ash had seen them coming and come out to his dock, and Harl Pren had followed them along his fence line, and then through his gate. And a woman from the adjacent farm, Lara Kessler, who had opinions about most things, and had revised her opinion of Snaga upward after the fence repair became known, had come out onto the road to see what was happening. There were, by the time they reached the ferry dock, 6 people standing in the thin winter sun on the bank of the Greyvale River. Elijah Maddox stood in front of them with Snaga Ironblood beside him, and he looked at the small assembly and said plainly, "I want witnesses. I am claiming this woman as my partner, my equal, and the person I intend to spend my life beside. That is my declaration, and I am making it here." He looked at Snaga. She looked at the gathered people, Dav Ash with his cup, Harl Pren with his hands in his coat, Lara Kessler with her arms folded, 3 others she did not know well but who were looking at her without hostility, which was more than she had expected from most places most of her life. "I chose this man," she said. Her voice was clear and level and rang off the cold river water. "In my tradition, the woman claims. I am claiming him. I have already marked him and myself and said so in front of the sky, and I am saying it again in front of this valley." She looked at Elijah. "You are mine. I am yours. I chose you. Specifically, I will keep choosing you." He took her hand. His left hand with her name on the inside of his wrist. She took his, her left hand with her own name marked. They stood on the Greyvale ferry dock in the January cold with the river running behind them and the valley spread around them and 6 witnesses in the winter sun. And that was the ceremony, no altar, no proclamation, no ancient rite, just 2 people facing each other in the open air and saying what was true in front of the world they lived in without qualification and without apology. Dov Ash raised his cup. "About time," he said. Harl Pren, after a moment, made a sound that was his particular version of approval. Lara Kessler looked at the marks on both their wrists and nodded once, with the expression of a woman who has correctly predicted a thing and is satisfied by it. The river moved behind them, brown-green and wide and unhurried. The mills were still in the winter quiet. The ferry bell hung silent on its post, and the cold air was perfectly clear. And Elijah Maddox held onto the hand of the woman who had broken her chains in his valley and chosen to stay. And in 4 months she had given him back the thing he had not known he was missing. The thing you lose so gradually, you only notice it is gone in the moment it returns. Sudden and irreversible as the first morning after a long winter when the air smells different, and you know, before any other evidence, that it is going to be warm again. She squeezed his hand, he squeezed back. Later, weeks later, when the valley gossip had circulated through its full circuit, and the story had been told at the Crossings Tavern in the various versions that stories collect, and in most of them Snaga broke the chain with one hand while fighting 3 men simultaneously, which was not accurate but which nobody with accurate knowledge was in any hurry to correct. Dov Ash would be asked why he thought she had stayed. He was, after all, the person who knew the most about the comings and goings of the valley. He would pick up his cup. He would think about it. He would say, with the comfortable authority of a man who has watched many things from many ferry docks over many years, "She broke those chains herself, walked out in the open on my dock in front of 20 people when she could have walked away clean. She stayed. And when Maddox walked through the crowd, she looked at him the way you look at something you didn't know you needed until you saw it in front of you. She's a woman who does nothing she doesn't mean. She stayed because she meant it." And whoever was asking would say, "But why him? Why a fruit farmer?" And Dov Ash would set down his cup. "Because he walked through the crowd," he'd say. And she knew what that meant. Nobody could quite argue with that. The valley understood it well enough eventually. In the orchard, on the south-facing slope above the Greyvale River, the trees waited for spring. And when it came, as it always does, regardless of the arithmetic of the winter preceding it, regardless of who has spent what reserve and on what, the blossoms came first, small and white and impossibly fragrant in the cold morning air, and the bees found them, and the press barn smelled of last year's good work, and 2 people stood in the rows among the blossoming trees in the early light, one tall and green-skinned with amber eyes and the other lean, and sun-dark with a fruit farmer's rope-muscle arms. And they looked at the valley below them that was theirs, not by deed only but by every hard and deliberate and loving choice they had made in it. And the river ran below, and the mills turned in the spring water, and the ferry bell rang once, twice, 3 times across the clear morning air. Her name was on his wrist and his name was on her heart, and nobody in the valley was still asking why she stayed. Some questions answer themselves. You only have to watch long enough.